grade school? Yeah.
Thank you.
We need to pay back the residents of New England for healthcare costs just from 2012 emissions from this plant, Brayton Point. So I need some spare change. Good morning. Thank you each for coming today to release a new report that details the health and mortality rates, yes, death rates unfortunately, and their associated costs that resulted from operating this plant behind us here, Brayton Point, in 2012. The report is Brayton Point Coal Plant, operating at our expense. And the title tells the story. Residents of the South Coast and of New England pay with both our health and our pocketbooks to underwrite the profits of the local power plant. So in 2012 alone, emissions of air pollutants from here, such as lead, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen oxides, resulted in health effects such as increased asthma attacks, acute bronchitis, heart attacks, and premature deaths. So not only do families suffer from these painful conditions, they have to pay for the care of doctors, hospitals, and medications to help treat these conditions. So they are burdened with a cost that is unrecognized, an unpaid expense created by burning coal for electricity. So this report reveals those enormous costs to society of burning coal at Brayton Point Power Station. And the numbers are breathtaking, I'm afraid. In 2012 alone, the cost of mortality and health care from pollution at Brayton Point totaled in a range from between $120.5 million to $294.5 million. Further in the report detailed is a 10-year projection of the health effects and cost for these same health problems. And the price skyrockets to over $6 billion. In 2012, the plant sitting behind us here operated at historically low rates. And we'll hear from Dominion in response to this report and other concerns that they've invested greatly in pollution cleanups, up to $1 billion in pollution emission controls. However, you can do the math. 1 billion, 6 billion. There's also the health effects that we suffer. So the illness and death and expenses remain this high, even on a day like today when we don't see steam coming from the cooling towers. This plant isn't operating at full capacity, and yet the health effects and the cost to our economies are still this high. The bottom line, we believe, is that these are preventable harms and preventable costs. It's time that we resolve together as a community to have a smart transition plan away from coal so that the South Coast and New England can breathe easier. This report is being released by Coal-Free Massachusetts, which is a statewide coalition. Mike, does your daughter suffer from
asthma.
From asthma, so she has to limit her outdoor activities?
Yeah, she has to limit her outdoor activities when the bad air day strikes, so we need relief from this type of pollution immediately. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you tell us what kind of attack she has?
Breathing problems. She can't catch her breath. She has to take an inhaler. And that's basically about it. And then she recovers.
What's that like as a parent? I mean,
Well, it's scary because you can't really. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. So you're a parent and you're frustrated.
Yes. Oh, it's very scary because you have no control over what's going on, and you just hope that the medicine's supposed to take place, it does its job.
And may I ask that let us to get through the rest of our statements, and we're happy to do some questions with the individual speakers after. Next, we will hear from Dr. David Weed, who is the Executive Director of Partners for a Healthier Community, which is throughout Greater Fall River. David.
Thanks, Becky. This is an important occasion when we focus on a problem that's been in this community for years. Something that on a day like this is essentially invisible. The particulate matter and the ozone and mercury and other chemicals that come from electricity generation at this plant have their health effects not only on the residents of this city but all across southern New England. Depending on which way the wind's blowing, and today it's a typical day where the wind is blowing from west to east, the pollutant effects really spread across the Cape and in some respects actually circle around the world. They contribute to the kinds of toxins and air pollution that affects not only what people breathe, but also what people drink. People forget that a lot of these pollutants begin to settle after they come out of those chimneys into the water, our drinking water supply, which would be one of the best in the world, but we've been plagued by increased levels of mercury, which come from the plant, settle into the water, are washed out by the rain, and then enter our food system here. So Partners for a Healthier Community has been advocating for 20 years for all kinds of things that we can do to prevent the high rates of heart disease, asthma, diabetes, and other chronic conditions that are costing this community and the rest of the Commonwealth a great deal of money. But it's been difficult for us to do something about the facility that's behind me here. Coalitions such as this and Clean Water Watch and others who are concerned, Green Futures, concerned about the environment, really have to become the spokespeople for people who have little voice in this community about their health. And I'm pleased to see that in this gathering today that we're focusing attention with this report on the actual costs of what that facility provides, and that we need to look to a better way of generating the power that we need. There are cleaner alternatives, and we need to keep the pressure up to make sure that those alternatives are sought and provided. So thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Dr. Weed. Next, we'll hear from Joe Lazzarini, who's the grassroots coordinator at the Coalition for Social Justice.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming out for such an important report. The organization I work for, the Coalition for Social Justice, is dedicated to building a grassroots movement for progressive social change in southeastern Massachusetts, and that's why we're here today. The health costs, the economic and physical strain on people forced to pay out-of-pocket expenses for doctor visits, hospital visits, and ER visits, prescription costs, and missed work days totals to millions of dollars in 2012 and to billions of dollars in the next 10 years that we can't afford. This is also local jobs in our economy. Brayton Point's profits are falling drastically, and Brayton Point's earnings dropped from $345 million in 2009 to $24 million in 2012, a decrease of 93%. The value of this plant right behind us is falling drastically. And this means less money for Somerset and less money for the South Coast, which is facing a huge budget crisis. There are fewer workers at the plant, and our region locally is also threatened by huge job losses. Across the country, we've seen that coal is ending. And nationwide and in this region, coal plants are closing. For instance, the coal plant in Salem, Massachusetts, it's no longer there. Montville, Connecticut, no longer there. And we know it will be difficult for Brayton to make money in the future, and we have to prepare for what is coming. This isn't the end, but we need to act now to address both health and the economy. We can reduce health impacts from Brayton Point and create new jobs and tax revenues by transitioning to diverse and innovative energy sources and attracting other businesses to the area that don't have to steep costs to our health. For our energy needs, an ongoing shift is needed to rely increasingly on energy efficiently, conservation, and clean renewables. Provisions must be made for a just transition for Somerset and for the South Coast, a community that has borne the health effects of 2 coal plants in its history, that provides new economic opportunities and jobs and also supports displaced workers while moving away from burning coal. When coal is burned, we pay more for power than what we pay on our bill. The damages to health and to our communities are unaccounted for costs with this plant, and that company does not bear those costs. Us, the residents of the South Coast, do, and that's why we need to do something about this. Thank you.
Association of the Northeast.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. I just want to talk briefly about some of the health impacts that you'll read about in the report. One of the main things that we see is an increased level of ozone thanks to the carbon pollution that comes out of coal-fired power plants. In our most recent State of the Air report released just a few months ago, the county that we're in, Bristol, received an F. In fact, it was the only county in Massachusetts to receive a worse grade in ozone than they had the year before. As a result of increased ozone, some of the health impacts we see are shortness of breath, wheezing, and coughing, in addition to increased asthma attacks like Mike's daughter sees. We also see increased risk of respiratory infections and exacerbated pre-existing conditions for people with lung diseases and as well as cardiovascular diseases. Some of the people we see as most vulnerable to this are healthy people who work outside, but as well as youth, the elderly, people with pre-existing conditions like asthma or COPD or cardiovascular diseases. Just to kind of add a little bit onto what Mike was mentioning that he experiences as a parent, in the report which you have all received, you'll hear a story about Antonia. Her 10-year-old son has asthma, and he's just an active little boy who wants nothing more to play outside with all of his friends, attend basketball camp. But just a couple of months ago, he almost had to go to the hospital and had to rely on medications and his nebulizer to get his asthma under control. And Antonia, as a parent, and as Mike does, monitors the health of the air, looks at the kind of conditions to see if there are any warnings. And even with that, you know, if they keep them inside, you're still not able to seal yourself off from the effects of these pollutions. So we, on behalf of all parents that we hear from, are really working to improve the health by hopefully transitioning away from coal. And I'm really happy to be involved in the release of this report, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you to each of my speakers and to all folks who came to participate and to the media who came to take note of this new report and new data today. So there is some good news, thankfully, and it's that Massachusetts is already #1 in energy efficiency in the United States. So that means that the first of the kilowatt hours that we'll replace from coal burning are the ones that we don't use. Our communities like Fall River are receiving some additional resources to help low to moderate income residents, renters, non-English speakers, and communities of color access these energy efficiency programs such as weatherizing and retrofitting properties so we can all use less energy. Of course, Massachusetts, as we all know, including right across the river here in Somerset where they're building a large solar array, we're already leading the nation as well in citing renewable energy resources. At the legislature here, at the statewide level, there's a bill, House Bill 2933, for instance, that is an act relative to a clean energy commonwealth. And this bill would help to steward the transition process. So the things that we've called for here today to move us away, to really pivot away from the past and into future clean energy resources, which includes planning and resources from the state to help Somerset transition from its tax reliance on Brayton Point and jobs that would be transitioned away from coal burning. So the bottom line, again, today is that the pollution that comes from this plant is preventable. The harm to our health and the cost we pay for that harm is preventable. So it is time for us to resolve together across sectors, as a region and as a community, to have a smart transition plan away from coal so that the South Coast and New England can breathe easier. Burning coal for electricity is not only crippling our health, it's crippling our economy. It's time to pivot from the old, take steps into the future towards an innovative, clean tech, 21st century energy and jobs infrastructure for the region. The engines that drive our economies should not cast this heavy a shadow on both our health and our economies. I want to thank folks for attending today. We'll be here for questions with our speakers, and at noon there's a conference call-in line anyone is welcome to ask some questions of the researchers on the study if you want to ask some questions about the methodology.
What year was Lazzarini at LA?
This is my last year. Oh my gosh. Yeah, she doesn't like it even saying it.